All right, we're back. It is COMP123, and it's the summer 2016 semester at Centennial. It's week 9, part 1. Today we're starting off pretty cool stuff. It's all, well, pretty cool. Better than the console applications. We're going to actually do some Windows applications. I'm just going to launch my virtual machine here. I'm going to resume it. I recommend the same thing for you guys. Get Visual Studio going. I'm not sure if these machines, we're located in a different room today, and I'm not sure if the machines in front of you have Visual Studio at all. I don't know what they have, right? So
they do.
That's it?
2013.
All right, 2013. Okay, good. So we have some images that work. That's good. Other than that, I mean, it's going to be a little different in terms of our style, the way we do things today, because I've got this stuff projected on the whiteboard. Sorry if it's small. So please try and keep up in terms of just following along. You may not be able to see everything, but at least I'll have everything recorded on video. So I'm here in Visual Studio. I'm going to pull up Visual Studio here to start off. We're going to talk about some things about UI. The project that we're going to be doing here is going to be different than the project type we've used before. We're not going to do a console application again, right? We're going to go into a Windows Forms application. I would refer you to some PowerPoints that I put up online. So if you look at COMP123, under week 9, I have 2 parts. Part 1 is kind of an intro to UI, right, for those people who need it, right? Actually, this came out of chapter 3 from the book that we were using, right? And there's also week 11's chapter 11's part, which is the UI controls part. I'm going to quickly run through part 1 and maybe a bit of part 2 today, right? See how it goes. But really what I want to try and get to is, how do we build an application that's a Windows Form application? How does the C# language fit into that structure? That might be pretty good. You know, that kind of thing. So we'll talk about the form and what a form is, and we'll investigate a little bit of that. We'll kind of make add a button and a label to the form and do some stuff, maybe do a little bit of calculations, those kind of things. All right? So let's talk about that. So here's your Visual Studio. And again, I really do apologize for the size that I'm getting here. It's quite small, but it is what it is in this room, right? Can't do much about it. What I'm going to be pulling up here is a new project. So click on New Project. And instead of our C# console application, by the way, if you're using Visual Studio 2015, you also have something called Universal Windows Application. This is the new stuff. Please don't pull that one up. That's like making Universal Windows apps so you can run Xbox games and all kinds of other stuff, you know, and Windows. And it's not a WPF application. Windows Presentation Foundation is not what we're using. That's what this is. It's actually a Windows Forms application, this one. So what I want to do is, because we're just going to make sure it's in the right folder here, we're going to just call it the name of our class today. So it's COMP123 lesson 9. All right, that's what the project is going to be called under COMP123. I'm opening up a Git repository here and pressing OK. All right, you're going to notice immediately when we get this going that the situation is going to be slightly, well, much different than what we've seen before. So let's talk about this, because you're going to get a different view. Whoa, what the hell is this? Right? This is different than what we've seen before. And so we'll talk about it. I got this little form here, right? In my Solution Explorer, I want to kind of pull this up as well. We have this first form, this form1.cs. That is our class. It looks like a class. CS files are usually our class, right? What we have is 2 parts to the form. The design view, okay? There's design view. And on the back end, there's also the form designer, this part. If I double click on this, you'll see that what you get is a partial class. This is different than what we've ever seen before, partial class, right? Wow, and you're going to say, Tom, what the hell is a partial class, right? Partial class, not a full class. What you can do in C# is you can write the class across different documents. So you can extend the class in different places and only expose certain parts of the class that you're writing, so that way you can, you keep stuff private or, kind of non-exposed. And they've done that for the designer because whenever we create a Windows application, Windows Form application, you kind of have the design piece, which we're going to show you in a second, and then a related backend, right, which shows you the design piece. This is the design piece, right? Notice that this text, if I have a component, I have a new component model, and you don't have to know this stuff. I'm just going to, kind of, and then we have a property called this text, and this text is form 1, all right? A lot of the stuff we can do on the design side, in the designer view, by the way, I'm going to ask you not to touch it, right, for this next half of our semester. Why? Because you touch this, you mess with your form, and it never looks the same. You can't use the designer, can't use drag and drop functionality, which is the reason why we use forms, and all that kind of stuff. So please close this off. I'm just showing it to you so you see the parts of the form. So that's one part. The other part of the form itself is if I right-click on the form. So here I'm on the form, hovering over on Solution Explorer. I right-click onto it, right? And you can see that there's also, I want to use the code, view the code, right? So this is the code, which is F7. See, the shortcut is F7 to see the code. So if I see the code, hey, this is something we've seen before. It's a class, right? And notice that we have a couple things. Let's inspect this class a little bit carefully. We have a public partial class again. This is the other half of the class. Actually, there's three. There's three bits to it. So the first part is the design view, the designer. The second part is this part of the class, which is the actual code behind file, if you will, right? We also notice that the name of the form, which is form 1, is the name of the class, right? Which is kind of ugly. Form 1 is really an ugly name, right? And also the constructor, this is the constructor right here, calls something called initialize component, right? Initialize component. Now notice that initialize component comes from form 1, initialize component. I don't see initialize component anywhere in form 1, do you? No, that would be on the designer. So if I go back to the designer, form 1 designer, just to see where kind of, I want you to understand what's happening. I don't want you to touch anything though. So if I go back down here, you see that there's an initialize component method that I'm calling. And what this is doing, just to show you what it's doing, is it's my components creates a new component container. So I want you to think about the form itself. If I was going to go back to the hierarchy, the form itself that we're going to be seeing, the visual elements of the form are going to be contained in something called this container object, right? Now this is system.component model. This comes from the namespace that where all forms live, all right? Also, the next part is auto scale mode is system.windows.form auto scale mode font. So the fonts will scale according to the form size, okay? Just letting you know. And then again, the text of the form, the name of the form will appear as form 1. Now, remember, a form itself is just a class, and it has a bunch of properties associated with it, which we'll see in a second. So let's close off this, the backend file, for a second. And you know what? Let's even close off this piece, the front end, the drag and drop piece, for a second. And let's take a look at the Solution Explorer for one more second here. Okay. What I want to do is I want to rename this form to something else. For example, let's make an example form today where I have I want to take in the username and a password, and kind of display my username and password that I entered. It's like kind of a very simple form. So again, so let's change this form name from form 1. I want to rename. So right click, rename. Notice it'll open up this window here, and we want to change the form name to login form. Keep the form on the back end. That's kind of a convention, login form. And it's going to ask you, do you want to rename and cascade the change of the name throughout the entire form? Absolutely, because it's more contextual than keeping form 1 everywhere, right? So we're going to click yes. And if I double click on the form again, double click, I can see this is the form. Notice that my form says login form up here, right? That's the name of the form. If I click F7 again, F7 will take me to the code behind file for the form, the C# file, and now I see my form is called, or my class is called login form, which again extends the form class, which is in system.windows.forms. Okay, so that's really what we're doing. We're using a set of classes. Part of them are, are classes that display have display objects in them. Like this is a display object that shows kind of a preview of what the window will look like. Hey, how about this? Let's build and run just this and see what we get. Okay, so I'm just gonna click start. When I do, if everything is configured properly on your system, you'll get this. Notice that I still get form 1, because remember that text property inside the code designer on the designer side, it says form 1. That's the name of my form. But this is my form. This is the actual form that comes up. If I click the X button here on the top, my form closes and my application stops. Okay, that's the default behavior. You can disable those things. You can change those things. And we'll do that as we go forward. Here's something else I want you to bring. Let's bring up the properties. So I've got my properties window kind of over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it so that it's below my form. You can also pin it so it's the side. I'm just going to bring this up so I can see more of the properties window. So I want to change the form itself, the name of the form. And there's a couple of ways I can do it. I can do it here in the properties window. So let me show you what I do when I go to the properties. So here's my form itself. So I'm clicking on my form. And you can see that I have control over many, many things here. For example, the name of my form is login form, right? That's the name of my form. I also have other application settings up here, right? Which I can kind of look through here and you can see. Just open them up and close them up again. And many other things. These are all the properties that are associated with this class. Hey, this is a hell of a big class, right? There's a lot of little properties in here. If we want to look at the class diagram for this form, let's take a look and see what we get. So I'm going to open this up. Again, this is all just orientation right now, an intro into what forms are. So I'm going to right click on my project and I'm going to add new item. All the same controls, everything you could do before is still there. In fact, you can even add another class in here if you wanted to really to have some kind of console access. But right now what I want to do is I want to go diagram, my class diagram. Let's add that in, and we're going to call this the form class diagram. That's what we're doing today, Windows Forms. And of course, it's going to give us an empty diagram like this. And I want to drag and drop my login form onto the diagram. So whoop, see what I get. All right, so I'll open it up. I've got a bunch of components just to listen, inspect these things. And if I open it up, like completely open it up here, and if I do one of these, I'm kind of disappointed, right? Like I would have expected my form to be full of stuff, but all I have is my main method and a couple of other methods: initialize, component, which is part of my form, and dispose. These things are grayed out because I'm looking at my login form, and my login form is only a partial class. So when it shows grayed out components like this, it means that they belong to the other, or they're actually initialized somewhere else. If I will right click on the form itself, all right, just wanted to show you this thing. I right click on the form, and if I say show base class, this is where it gets hairy, because, and it'll take a little bit of time to pull this up, because it'll pull up the crazy form class, which should show me all the properties. I just showed you on the properties panel. Okay, here it is. Here's the form class. And you can see that there's tons of properties. These are all of them, right? And if I kind of do one of those, you can see that this class is quite massive. Okay, quite big. That's the class that we're using. So far, up until today, what we've been doing is we've been making our own classes and using some small classes. This form class, you can see, has a lot of overhead. There's tons and tons and tons of properties here. These are all the properties, auto size, and so on, all the way down to text. You know, here's our text object, and all the way down here where it says methods. Right, these are all the different kinds of methods we can use. Right, a lot of them, if you see the word "on" in front of them, just like you would think when you look at something like on JavaScript, the old JavaScript way. On something means it's an event handling method that's already been pre-written for us. Okay, a lot of different methods we can use. Also, a bunch of different events that are already pre-done for us that we can hook into. Like, for example, when my form is closed, when my form is closing, when my form is deactivated, and so on. A lot of different events we can hook into. And there's so many other things in this thing. Just wanted to point this out so that way, if you ever have a doubt of what you can do with your form, These are all the things you have access to, and they're all part of your class right now. Okay? Okay. So, big deal, Tom. Who cares? I got this class, you know, kind of thing. I'm going to close this one off. I'm just going to leave this here. We can always go back to the form class diagram later on. But what I want to do is I want to change the title of my form. So it doesn't say form 1. I want to change it to login. Okay? Where do I change that? Let's use some intuition. Where do I change that? Designer? No. Remember, we don't touch the designer. Oh. We never touch the designer. The designer is hell for us. It's death. Properties. It's properties. Okay? So what I would do is go down to where it says text. The text property of the form itself. All right? And next to it, type in the name of the form. Login. Property value is not valid. How come? How come? It says, well, it says login, right? How come I can't do anything with it? Oh, there it is. I don't know why it said that. Control set. Value does not fall within expected range. Well, why? Did you get that too? Well, it worked like that for me. So again, I guess I could kind of call it something like login, right? That's fine. Or I could call it something like login form, right? That's fine too. And notice whatever I call it pops up here, right? So if I run this thing now, by the way, login might be a reserved word. If I run this thing, now you're going to see that it recompiles everything. It takes a bit of time to do that. And then it says, well, Microsoft Visual Studio, I'm getting this really weird error that my value does not fall within my range, right? So it's not running properly myself. Let's save this thing. It's not even doing that. Value does not fall within range. I'm getting a really weird error, right? How do you fix it? So I got this weird error and it's breaking my app, right? How do I do it? Because I messed with the designer. I told you, don't touch the designer. The designer. And I've also, pulled up the form class diagram, which might have messed with it as well. Maybe I did something by accident. I'm going to close this one off. That's what I'm going to do, right? A couple things I can do. Reopen it. That's the first thing I can try, okay? And again, notice that form 1 is showing up there. That's a good thing. But down here, what I want to do is I want to change this value to login form like that, and then rerun it. When I rerun it, it should save the form and everything's good. All right, so if you ever get that kind of error, the first thing I would try is this. What's the second thing I would try if my form was messed up? Kill my form. No, kill my form and do it again and just make another one. We'll talk about how we can add other forms to this one. So this is the first thing to note is this. Now, here's the control I have. My form is flexible. I can move it around. I can make it small, like this big. I can minimize it. These are all built-in controls. Maximize it, right? I can minimize it. I can bring it back into being. It also has a default icon. That's a part of it right here, right, up on the top. I can also click on the icon and move, size, do all kinds of stuff like normal Windows forms, right? This is all default behavior, however, and I can enable and disable whichever parts I want, right? Okay, so here's my login form. Now you'd be forgiven to think that I can just drag this form around anywhere around. You can't drag this form in the middle of your screen to work with it over here. No. It stays on the top left corner, right? It's just a place where you can drag stuff on. Let's go to the left where I have my toolbox and bring my toolbox up. And I want to pin my toolbox up here. Here's my toolbox. That's cool. I got my toolbox happening right here. And if you notice, I have something called common controls. Let's pull up this area called common controls on my toolbox. Notice that I have a bunch of stuff. And if you've done any kind of ASP.NET web forms, this is almost identical, right? In fact, if you ever do web forms with me in the coming semester or whatever I'm doing web forms, we'll do something similar where you can drag and drop for a couple times. But for the most part, for web forms and ASP.NET, we don't use drag and drop. Why? Because for web forms, it'd be ugly, right? I'll say it like that, right? Because what you see is not what you get. However, with Windows forms, what you see is what you get. Let's show you what I'm talking about here. So let's say, for example, I want to put some stuff into place. I want to put a label on the form. So here's I just drag and drop a label. Just drag and drop it from the toolbox. Please try this with me. I'm going to make this form a little bigger. You can drag the controls, the control handles here to make the form bigger for yourself right now. So here's my label. And now my label, I want to change the text of my label here, right, in my properties view to something like, username. Username. Here's my username. It's pretty small, right? But we're going to come back to this in a second. And If I want to change the font size of my control, right now my control font size, it's pretty small, username, and I've got to kind of hover over there. If I want to make this bigger, where do you think I could do this? Just say it, right? It's in the properties. So go and try and find it. Play around, guys. Notice that it has all controls in here for a form. So if I look at Microsoft Sans Serif, 8.25 points. Notice it's not pixels, but if I click on this font, and if I click on the size, I could do that. I could specify it by hand, or if you don't expand it, and if you click on this ellipses, a little dialog box comes up. Yay, which is what we're used to. And you can change the font here. Like for example, let's say I want to make it so that it's, and this is any font you have installed in your system that would work. I've got tons of fonts here, right? But you might have other fonts. Let's use Lucinda Sans. That might be something that you have, right? And I want to change it to Lucinda Sans. Or you could choose any kind of sans serif font, a Helvetica or something else like that. And on the right where it says point size, let's go to a healthy size of 20, right? And let's see what happens now. Whoa, username. That's quite big, right? Here's something else that happens. When I drag my label around, this is a label control. Listen to my words. Label control. Control means that it is actually an object. If it's an object, I can do something with it on the C# side of the house, right? Now, here's something that I always want to do when I put a control in place. Notice that my name for my control is label 1. Does this make any sense in our context? No, it should be called something with username in it. For example, username label. And I want you to use this convention. Whenever we drag a control onto our canvas here, and this would be the canvas that we're using, the background form, I want you to always use the name that the control that you want, whatever that name is. In this case, username. That's contextual, and then the name of the control on the back end, which is label. So username label is what we're going to call this thing, and we're going to use upper camel case. Camel case would be the first character is low, like a lowercase, and then every other word is capitalized. Upper camel case is every word is capitalized. That's what I want you to do with Windows Forms. This is the convention we're going to use for all of our variables. Okay, so that means that this control should be called username, right? And you could even probably do something like this if you really cared for it. But username is actually the username. So username label is enough for me. Please don't call it UL. All right. I don't want any short forms. We have lots and lots of space when we do variable names for web forms and for Windows forms. We want to do it like this. So now this has the name of username label. Username label. Okay, there's a method to my madness. Please bear with me. Here, let's move this thing around. Notice that I get some weird little blue. See the little blue line here on the top? And if I go to the left, I see another little blue line here too. This little blue line gives me almost like a preset margin to make my control, right, usable. It also does a couple things. If I do one of these with the blue line, if I reset my form, it'll stick to that area. So example, if I do one of these, where I have the blue line on the top and the left, and if I run my form, here's my username, and if I do one of these, and if I kind of resize my form when it lets me, so resize my form, right? And even if I reset from the bottom, it still stays to the top left. What if I put it over here? What happens, right? So let's just stop this. And I'll take my username label. Again, we're just navigating the environment, okay? This is not exactly what I want right now, but I'll put it to this side. Notice that the little two blue lines come up on the top and the right? Top and right. And then if I run this thing again, and see what happens. Here's my username, but if I do this, well, you would expect that it would follow along. It does not. It just sits there to the right side of the form. So it gives you a bit of a margin based on the form, and you could change the margins and everything else. Okay, remember, we're not making responsive forms right now. All we're doing is making it so that when I put something on the form, it displays exactly where I want it. Here's something else. If you want an exact size of the form, like a specific size, like my form right now is I just dragged it randomly, but if you want to make it the same size as mine, right? And if you want to look at the size that I have is 434 by 424. right? This is the size right here. You can actually enter the data right here in your properties, right? 434, 424, and make it that one. But that's a kind of a weird number, 434 and 424. I want to make my form perfectly square, 450 by 450. Let's try that. So I'm going to say 450, be careful, by 450 and press enter. Notice that my form now is 450 by 450. It's exactly square. And if I run this thing, this is the actual size that I get, 450 by 450, right? And yours will look like mine. I want to pull my username to the left and a little bit down now. And if I really want to position it in the exact position, you can see that my location is also here for my control. By the way, what's the default location? Where does it start off? Is it the middle of my control? Is it the right side of my control? Where is it? Top left. All controls start off with the top left orientation, right? And right now, the top left corner tells me where this form is located. It's a 42 and 28, right? That's 42 across and 28 down. That's a weird number. Let's make it 40 and 30. So just change this, 40, 30. Now we'll put my control is exactly, starts off at 40 and 30. I'm talking slow. I'm going slow with the designer. The reason why is because, yes, we can drag and drop, and yes, we can do it by eye, but why? Right? You have all the control you want in here. Now, here's something that I want you to know, and this is different than when you program with Android, iOS, or any other kind of windowing kind of system or UI. The layout that we're using here, I want you to think about it as absolute layout. This is not a relative layout. Okay? We don't have a layout manager right now that's laying out my forms in a relative way. Okay? The forms that we're using here with Windows Forms is absolute layout. Wherever you see is what you get. Okay? If you want to have any kind of responsiveness or whatever, all of that for us has got to be programmed. Right? So if I want to program my elements to move around, to do stuff, whatever, look nice, it's up to me. I got to program all that stuff. Okay, cool. So my username is here. It's got a size of 20, right? And I want to pull in another kind of control on the left-hand side called a text box. So go back to the text box over here on the left. Here it is. Dragging it underneath my form, right? Notice that I can drag it right so it abuts with my label. There it is. It's not right, right? This would be very, very small, right? And you know what? Let's change the font size of this object here as well so that it reflects what I want. I'm just going to go here and go 20. Now this is per control, right? Per control. But this is becoming quite, quite bothersome for me. I have to keep doing this over and over again. And, I want to make sure that the control is the right size by 20, right? So there is an easier way to do this. But first of all, let's change the name of my control. What should my control be called? Come on, intelligent, lovely people. Joanne, what should I call this control? I'm going to use this. It's going to be the place where I enter my username, right? Because one is the label, the other one is where I'm going to enter my username. What should I call this control? Username text box. Yoo-hoo! You got it right. I know it's kind of silly, and I want to make it in upper camel case, and the reason why is because we have lots of room. Username, lowercase, and because we're using that same text box. Okay. Here's why. If I want to access any element on the front end in my form itself, and I want to access it with code from the back end, I know now what these things are called, so I can reference them, right? Whereas label 1 and label 2 and text edit 1 or text box 1, text box 2, I have no meaning. That has no meaning for me. This is actual meaning, which is better. Okay, cool. Well, this is a lot, but what if I want to do something on the form itself? So I'm clicking the form, and there's also, if you look down, the form itself has font sizes, and the default font size is right here, right? So I'm clicking the form to do that. Click the form, go down to the font, click this, go to here, and now I can do the same thing with the form. What does this do? Well, kind of similar to what we did with each control. So you can do it by control, or if I go to 20, if I press OK, you can do it with the form. Here's the form. Well, what happened? Right? Spread things out, did stuff weird, like weird things, move my stuff around, kind of organized everything. Well, once I've set the form to a certain size, it'll relatively change the size of my entire form based on my font. So any controls that are currently in there will resize. Anything I drop in here from now on will be that size, which is going to help me. But so I probably would have liked to change the font from the beginning. But this doesn't change whatever we have here. So let's go move this back. So remember I said this would be 40. I want to still put it there. And my size of my form, I'm just going to kind of dull this down. You can see my size, the size of my form is become massive. Look, it's massive. If I run this thing, this is like what you see is what you get here. So this is how big the form will be. Why? Because I've changed my font size. So relatively, it makes everything, because my font size was 8, and now I'm making it 20. So it's going to be at least twice the size. That's what it's going to try and do, right? Nice, but really not really what I'm looking for. How do I fix it? I know that I want my form to be 450 by 450. Let's move this form back into that size range. And notice that my size now is 1173 by 1036. I'm just going to go, yours might be different. I'm going to go 450 by 450 again, which makes my form the right size. I'm going to move this back to where I think it should be, probably around right here, which is, for now, let's make it 30 by 30. It was something else before, it was 28 or something like that. And let's move this back over here, right? It doesn't have to be so massive for my username, but it's not going to hurt me either. Why? Because usernames can be quite large, right? It may not be so big, but right now the size of my username text box, if you want to see the size of the box, right? Each object has sizes too. The size is 375 by 39. The size of my username is 149 by 32, right? So this is 375 by 39. Let's make it, so instead of 375 by 39, we'll make it 370. So change this to 370 by 39. Don't change the height, because the height's auto-generated by the size of, the size of my my font, plus some inner padding that the form automatically puts in. There's a background style that we're using to do this stuff, and we'll talk about that later on. All right, so this is what I want. So this is my username and password. Let's make sure that these are aligned properly. And if you notice, if I pull my text box, I get that little funny blue arrow or blue line, and I also get another blue line, so I can align them together. Right? Notice that they get all these blue lines, right? So this is I can do it by hand like this. But what if I have a lot of controls and I want to align everything to one control? Like for example, I want to align everything to my username. So maybe it was like this. Well, the thing is, if I click the username and then click the other control, shift click, I want to align him on the top. You get this little alignment window that comes up, right? And I can do something like align lefts. Now notice I click the username first and then this one, right? Look what I get. Boop. Kind of pops up exactly. So it auto aligns everything to the left. If I did it the other way around, I'm just undo. So I'll just undo for a second. So this is where it was. If I do it the other way around, if I click this first and then this, right? And then when the alignment window comes up, I click this, it shifts back. So I don't want that. I want it the other way. So I want to click this first. The first control is the one that everything's going to be aligning to, and then the next one, and then click align left. So this makes it so the alignments are perfect. It's not like I have to do it by eye. I have to wait for the little line to come up or whatever. It's perfect. And I can do the same thing. I can align to the top. I can align to the right. I can align my controls so they all look nice. Okay, here's something also you can do. I got my username, but I want to put my password in place, right? Because username and password for my login form. Now, I could certainly drag and drop stuff from the toolbox, but what if you're a smart designer and I kind of copy this, so copy, and then I Control V, paste. Whoop, I get another one. So I just copied and pasted, and I want to now both of these two things are highlighted or selected, and I want to kind of move this up to the left, and you can see that I can do it by hand like this, right? Or I can highlight the first one, and then highlight everything else, and then click left, and then everything is aligned according to the left-hand side. So now they're all aligned properly. And if I want to kind of move these up, I can nudge them with my arrow keys. So I can, if I press the up arrow, I can nudge them carefully up, right? So by eye, they come higher and higher. You can also nudge them down. So arrow keys give you fine-grained control of what you want to do. Also, here's on the left-hand side, that's one interesting piece. But also, if you want to, again, I could align these forms so that, as an example, this object here, my username, is at location 30 and 128. So if I want to see where my username is located, and I want to put it exactly at a certain place, like for example, my username is at 3030, but this one here is at 3128. And let's say I want to go to 130 just to keep it exactly aligned. I could do that. 130. Then what I'd have to do is move this one down just a touch so that it aligns with my other one, right? Okay, so username and username doesn't make any sense. And if I click on the new username, what has it done when I copied and pasted? It just reverted back to the default name, label 1. So I have to redo this label and change the text. So let's put this as password label, right? And change the text value way on the bottom here. Again, this is alphabetical here to password. Okay. Also, on this part, the actual text box, it should be called password text box, like we talked about before as a convention. Now, you might think, do I have to do this, Tom? Absolutely not. And any coding house will make you do it their way. But in my coding house, you guys are in my coding house right now, we're all doing it this way, okay? Upper camel case, password text box. There we go. So we got my password text box and my password label. And what I can do, what about if I want to make my, I want to see what this does now, all right? So let's just run this form and see what I get. Can I actually type in there? Like, what do I do? What if I tab? What happens when I tab? How does it behave? This little form that I've made so far, right? Okay, so here it is. And if I go, username is blah blah. And if I go password, I go also blah blah. And if I tab, it tab to the password, right? That's cool. But my password gives me like clear text, right? Clear text password, which is kind of a negative. I don't want to ever show my text. Is there a way that I could change the type that I'm getting here, or can I mask this so that it's a password? And again, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to click on the actual text box, and we're going to kind of look up here, and let's look through. Can you see something that can stop me from, showing the characters? Come on, I want you to look through and see if you can do it. Where? So I go here, password character, and if I put in, let's say, the star or something like that and press enter, that's my password character. And if I press start, now I put that in. If I put username and password, I get passwords, right? I love it. Someone's trying to call me when we're always teaching. It's just the way. So that's pretty cool. That does it right there. Once you put the password character in place, it kind of changes the password character in there. So that's one thing that you can see, right? Also notice that I've got automatic tab indices. Here's my tab index. Here's my tab. If I click on this one, these objects. Let's try to go through here and see this how it works. So I've got my username, right? And I'm still aligned to the bottom here, and my tab index is 0. I've got my username text box, and my tab index is 1. My password, my tab index is 2. My my password text box, my tab index is 3. What is tab index? Whenever I press the tab key, it goes in order. So when I start off, it'll start off at 0. If you align anything at 0, now labels have a tab index as well, even though you can never get to them. I can't tab to a label. So if it's not a text box or some other control that I can do something with, then it's going to skip over that tab index. This is really important because you can align your forms so that you can control where your tab characters are going to take you, right? So that's important. Okay, cool. Let's add a button to this thing, right? So we've added so far a couple of controls, label and username, password. And I want to go here on the left where I have toolbox, pull this up, clip it on, and I want to pull in a button. Now there's different kinds of buttons. Just put in a regular button. And as I pull it in, you can see that, oh man, how come I can't see this? Well, because I made my button aligned to the text size of my form, which is 20, right? And my default button size is not large enough, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust it so that I can see the button itself. There we go. And you can make the button as big as you like, right? Now I'm going to change my button text. So instead of saying button 1 on the bottom here, I'm going to change it to log in, right? And I'm going to go to the top of my control, and change my name of my button to login button, right? Because it makes sense, right? Now, typically you won't see a login like this. You probably will have the button aligned to the right. So I'm not going to do it by eye. I'm going to click on one of these elements, then click this one, shift click, and then I'm going to align to the right, and it's going to align automatically. Also, I want to make sure that the position has some kind of meaning. So don't just leave it where it's supposed to be. I click on the button, and if you look down here in terms of the location, right? X is this X and Y horizontal behavior, but vertical it's 258. Let's make this, just make it even at 260. Right, so now it's aligned exactly where I want it. So I've aligned my button. It kind of looks nice, except I got a bit of extra room down here in my form, right? And should I make my form down here, different? Or here's another option. Maybe I got to put something in there, some kind of message that says something like, please log in, right? Now I can put it at the top, but that means I got to shift everything down. How do I do that? I can highlight everything, right? Highlight everything. And what I want to do is I want to use my eye right now to shift everything down. Now this is the good thing. If you're careful, you can shift everything down so that it retains everything, right? So notice I can go to the left, or I can go to the right a little bit, right? You can actually put it in the middle. This is approximately the middle that I see in my form, my eye, right? It's not perfect, and we can realign this later on, because we might realign it according to what we have up here, our message. So let's put another little label up there. So again, here's our label. Put it up here. And you can see that label 1 comes up there again. And this is my message label. So here's my message label. Notice I'm keeping the same. I'm keeping the same convention. And my text label will be, please log in. Okay. That's something that we would see. So this is my label, and I can align this. Again, its location is 40 and 25. I know that I had put it originally at 30 and 30, something like that for my form. So I could move this to 30 and 30. I could do that. That's where I want to start my form off, remember? The 30 and 30. And now I can align, I can use this one as the alignment piece for everything else. Now, I don't want to touch the login form, the login button yet, but I definitely want to realign my layout so that it aligns to the left, and that my login button aligns to one of the elements here to the right. So it'll shift back. So now it's kind of properly aligned. Now, again, I got a little bit more margin on the right side than I do on the left side. And if you really want to be technical about it, we could add a balancing. Instead of 30, maybe it should be to the right a little bit more to 40, something like that. And I could nudge it around. Like I said, if I really want to, I could highlight everything again, nudge to the right by using the arrow keys, wherever you like them. Okay, my form is done design-wise, but it doesn't do anything, right? So I want to try and run it first to test it. Here's my form. And this is a great place to put something up on GitHub. We've made our form, we've created our project, and we got our first form with a login form made already. So let's put that together. So I'm going to kind of go to Team Explorer, and I want to go to Changes, and I want to add on. You guys can see this, but I'll pull this down here, this way this time. I want to add all these changes to my project, and I'll say something like created login form, right? And I'll say commit staged. And now if I want to go home and I want to go sync, right? It's going to ask me, I don't have a repository, a connection, so how do I add the repository? I'm going to click on Centennial, and it's going to be COMP123 less than 9, but we're also going to make it so that it's summer 2016. On top of that, I probably should have done that too. You forgot something. And then click Publish. And now my form is out in the wild. Everyone can steal it, right? It's up on GitHub. I'm joking. I'm sharing it with you guys so you can compare what I got with what you got. But here's the problem. What I have, you can't see. You can't see a visual representation. You have to physically download it to see it because it's just code files. Let's inspect what we've done. And I want to do this part first before we take a short break, right? Because I think it's important for us to just drag and drop stuff in the beginning just to see what it does. I want to look at my Solution Explorer here, and I want to look at the designer. Remember I told you the designer is dangerous, right? Here's my form designer, right? So I'm going to double click here. And whoa, look at all this. System, private system.windows.forms label, username label, text box, username text box. And it kind of lists everything as properties. These are all properties of my form. That's what it does. Well, that's why on the form itself, then, we can assume that I can access the username text box by its name, username text box, because it's defined here inside the class. Okay, let's close this down without touching it, please. And what about this one? This is a new one, loginform.resx. Double click, and I have a resource called string1. Here's a resource name, string1, and there's a bunch of a resource file that I've created for my form. Well, this is very interesting because what I can do is it's a resource document, right, that keeps track of any icons on the form, any strings on the form, any audio on the form, any files related to the form, any something else that I want to related to the form. So this is interesting. Why would I have a string resource called string1? What would you think that I would even have resources like this attached to my form? What are they? Anybody have an idea? Well, there's a concept called localization. All right. So imagine I'm making my forms now for this culture, which means, and by the way, culture is not my word; it's the word from Microsoft, right? So for where I'm located right now is what I'm saying, right? So it's an English form for Canada, right? Well, I can describe these strings instead of it having, as an example, the names of my strings hard coded. So for example, my please log in, username and password, right? The message label, the username label, and the password label could be the message string, the username string, and the password string, right? And if that's the case, I could describe these things for English, right, and for other languages. So if I want to swap them, I could have a little button that says, when you click this button, swap to Spanish or swap to French, whatever, and I can describe my strings in both languages. Now I don't have to create all those, get the languages for French and Spanish or whatever language I want, put them in there, and I could switch between languages if I want to with some kind of control or setting, right? So we use localization. By the way, the concept of localization is used also for Android devices, if I'm programming for Android, or if I'm programming for iOS devices, or any other kind of device, or any kind of other UI. You can create, a string resource, and I can do it. We're not going to do it today, but I just want you to keep it in mind that I could change the language of what's on my form, including the login button's text. The login button also has the text. So I could change all these things. And if you notice, if I click on the login button, the please login message label, here's my message label, and I bring on my properties again. My message label itself has the ability to do a couple things, right? Notice that my text, please login, is here, but I also have this little down arrow. And the down arrow says I could choose something else. Like please login is something I can put in there. But I can also indicate that it points to a string resource as opposed to a hard-coded piece of text like this. Hard-coding anything in a machine like this, and when we program stuff in a UI, is bad. So I'm showing you the bad way first, right? And then we'll fix it later. Why? Because it's not totally that important. It's not like it's going to break you if you if you hard code it today. Today, I want you to just get an orientation of what the forms are about, drag and drop, that kind of stuff. Okay, form doesn't do anything. I want to be able to access these values, right? So when I click the login button, here are my words again. This could be on a little test or an assignment. When I click the login button, I want to somehow show my results somewhere, right? Maybe on a console. Oh, uh-oh. How do I show my results on a console or some kind of output, right? I want to be able to show my results somewhere. And let's run it without doing that first. Let's run it. So run it. Let's take a look at some of the windows I get. I get something called a locals window, right? I also get the output window. Take this output window here. This is my output window, right? And I get the immediate window down here. You might see the immediate window. This is a command window. And if you don't have these, by the way, you can always add them by going to debug, Windows, and then you can choose any of the windows I'm talking about right here. All right? Okay. So let's stop the form. If you can't see your form, if it disappears or if it's behind everything else, like this, like that was, you can always stop the form two ways. Here by clicking the X, or here by clicking this stop button. Okay, both those two things. Can I run without debugging? Because normally what I did was I was running with debugging. And I can also start my form without debugging. Right, there it is, much faster. But I don't get any of the debug windows happening. So if I want to do a quick preview of what my form is going to look like without debugging, but with functionality, I can do that. For example, now if I click the login button, it doesn't really do anything, right? This is not a form like in a web form. It's not like that. So please don't assume anything. Let me tell you that again. Don't assume anything. If I click the login button in a form, it'll do something. There's some kind of default action in JavaScript or even in PHP or in other languages. This is not web. So if I click the login button right now, I haven't programmed it, nothing happens. And even if I click on it later and I program it, I got to program every piece of behavior. If I want the form to clear, I got to program that, right? If I want the form to change languages, I got to program that. If I want the form to close, I got to program that too. Everything I got to do with this form, it's up to me to program. Let's do that. So we've talked about UI. Let's talk about doing a quick event handler, right? So how do you do it? See the login button? Double click, baby, like this. And what it does when I double click, it automatically creates, I'm just going to kind of unpin these for a second. It creates something called an event handler. Now, I want you to be careful. The event handler that I'm creating here is a partial. There's other piece parts to this thing, right? There's the event listener that already automatically gets created on the back end. You can't see it. It's on the design side. Remember, there's two parts. There's the actual design canvas that we kind of drag and drop stuff onto, right? Then there's runtime, when I'm actually running. So I can see in runtime what it looks like, right? This is coding on the code side, right? The code side shows me this piece. This is the code file, right? But there's also the design file, right? And notice on the top here, I got my resource here, which I'm not going to touch. Just close this off. I've got my login form.design. It says design. And it's the same login form, but there's two parts to it. There's the front end, which is rendering based on my designer, this part. Okay, so that's why you don't touch it. Otherwise, it won't render. It'll stop working. Okay? And then there's the actual back end, which is doing stuff. Remember that my public login form is the constructor. Let's just for practice, let's do a little bit of documentation. So I'm just going to do the same kind of documentation we're used to doing. We can add documentation anywhere. This is the constructor of the form. So I can say @constructor, and this is called login form, right? That's the login form, and it doesn't return anything because it's a constructor, and also it doesn't take any parameters. If we want to put it in a summary, we can put in a summary. And the summary for this is the default constructor. I want you to think about this still, even though we're dragging and dropping as a class for the login form. Oops, class. That's what it is. Okay. Also, my login button click right now is empty, and there's a couple of objects we have to look at here. So I'm going to do the same kind of documentation here at the top of this one. We're going to put something like this. We're going to put a summary in here first. And in the summary, we're going to put something. This is the login button click event handler. That's what it is. Click event handler. I'm going to put a lowercase handler, event handler. Right? And underneath that, again, it's a method @private. It's a private method @method, which is login button. By the way, the login button _click, not my name. It's automatically generated. Please don't change. It'll break your form. Seriously, right? It's all linked together here with Microsoft, right? And @returns. Wait, this doesn't return anything. We do have a couple of parameters, though, I have to mention, and we'll talk about these parameters. @param. One of them is of type object, and the parameter is called sender. And the other parameter, right, just to indicate this, is event args. That's the type of event args. And the parameter is E. You can change that, by the way. Instead of E, you can call it to something else, like event arguments, right? But the idea here is when I click on the login button, I'm just going to show you this. So just some documentation here. If I click on the login button, it does something, right? How about when I click on the login button, I get my username and password, right? And I show it to the console somehow, right? That would be kind of cool. Well, here's what I want to do. I want to type the word debug. So debug, and I want to do .writeLine, debug.writeLine. But I got a problem, right? Debug comes up and it says, Tom, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. What is debug? Well, if you go control, if you hover over debug and you kind of highlight it by double clicking on it, and you go control dot, it brings up using system diagnostics, which is a new namespace that I can add in by just clicking this. It's a quick way of adding a namespace using system diagnostics. Let me show you that again. So I double click onto it, and then I press control period or control dot, and then go using system diagnostics and click in there once. What it does is it adds in my using system diagnostics up here, right, into my namespaces that I can access, right? Okay, now obviously WriteLine is incorrect, right, because it doesn't go anywhere. How about some other stuff I can do? I can do indent, you know, I can do write, and I just typed it wrong, WriteLine, right? And what I want to do is write something. It needs something, a value that I'm going to print out. Well, what do I want to print to the console? Some kind of string or something. It can't be an empty WriteLine, all right, because it won't accept that. But I can do something like my username textbox.text. Here are my words, username textbox, username textbox.text. So what's the text? Text is the property of the username textbox, right? That's what I want to print out. And I want to kind of concatenate this as a string, something like username. I can do that. And the same thing goes with my debug.writeLine. Now, why debug.writeLine? And password. Password. I want to kind of pump out this password too, because we're not decrypt or encrypting it yet. So password textbox.text. Notice it has autocorrect, so I can just type in some of it and it'll do everything for me. Full set. So username textbox and password textbox. When I press the button, it'll send those to the debug, my console right now, right? Let's try this out. So I'm going to kind of press play. And if I press my username, so Tom and my password 123456, what I typed, and I click login, I'm in. Where'd it go? Did it do anything? How come? Well, because remember, we have to look at the output window down here, and you can see way down in the bottom, here's my username text box, my username and password right here. So this is how I do my output. When I do testing, when it comes to Windows forms, I always have to use debug.writeLine as opposed to console.writeLine. There is no console anymore. It's gone. But I can do my debug.writeLine here. Yes? Message text box? Message label? Yes. Yes, you could. You mean a message box? Yes, you could do that. Yes, we'll talk about that afterwards. You could do that. But we'll try it out later on, right? You're a little bit ahead, my friend, right? But it's good. This is good. You know what to do, right? Message box. But if I was to, so now right now it prints everything clear. But one thing it doesn't do is it doesn't clear my form. So my form not clear, right? So how do I clear up my form? I got my username, password, and then I want to clear my form afterwards. Is there a clear form command? No, right? There is no clear form command. You got to make them all, right? So there's a couple of things we can do. We can make a method that clears the form and call that method. Because maybe in the future we're going to do the same. We're going to access the same kind of thing or do the exact same thing over and over again, right? Or we can hard code it inside my login button, click event. I think it's better to make a method, and let's say we'll make it after login form. The thing. This is, by the way, these are right here. These are private. Notice these are private methods. And it can't, unfortunately, what we can't do is they don't align at all to my previous convention of underscore. However, I could make this, I could rename this, and I could change everything on the other side, but why? Let Microsoft do what Microsoft does and make it private, and we're good to go. Okay, this is my private methods. I want to make another private method, but this time we'll use our convention, right? And we'll just make it above this one, and we'll call this private method. So make it private void. We'll call this thing clear form, right? So underscore clear form. That's what it is. So it's a private method. Doesn't take any arguments, and returns void. And basically, all this clear form thing is going to do. So let's document it first. Do something like this. It is, and we'll say something like my summary for this one is this method clears the username text box and the password text box. That's what it's going to do, really. Right? All right, that's what it does. So now let's talk about what it is. Let's identify it at method. At private at method, and it's going to be called underscore clear. We're using our current conventions, the past conventions we were using, clear form, and then at returns void. Oops. There we go. Identify what it does, and we'll save. It hasn't done anything yet, but let's talk about what it will do. We haven't called it yet, but what I want to do is I want to take the text box, right, that's aligned with username and password, and make the text value what? Nothing. So I want to kind of assign it to the just empty quotes, like this. So I want to say username text box dot text. That's the text property of the text box, right? I want to make that equal to this, and username text box. Oh, password text box. Dot text is equal to that. But is there another way that we know how to do to make this happen as well? Because this is okay. This will work, by the way. But is there something else is there something that's built in that we can use? Yes. Textbox.clear. Let's try that out. So remember, it's all part of the class. So can I do clear? Right? And clear, is it a property or is it a method? Right? Clear method. It's important to know that because there's a couple things that it does a little differently when you clear. It generates a clear event, right? So it responds differently just assigning it to something. Be careful with this, right? So see here, and that's a better way to do it. It's much better to use the built-in events and try and rewrite them yourself, right? There's a reason why these things are helpful, and it says clears all text from the text box control, as opposed to putting quotes. That's a different thing, right? And it has a different output in the end. Okay, so I've got my clear form. It's kind of very simple. It's silly, but I'm just demonstrating that you can make methods inside your form just like any other class, because you know classes and objects. And down here, after I write stuff, I want to clear it up. So I'm going to call. I can use this keyword too. This dot underscore clear form, and then it'll clear the form. Okay. So as soon as my login button's checked or clicked, it'll output everything to the debug window and clear my form, so I can log in again. Or I can assume that the next person can log in, right? By the way, clear form we'll be doing because we're going to be mocking logging in and doing stuff over and over again. Okay, and also if I want to go from one form to the other, we're going to talk about that in future videos, right? Future times we're going to be working with more than one form, because how often do we work with one form? Like ever inside like in some kind of like, you know, you have an application, you have one form for the entire application. Almost never is my answer, right? We do a lot of stuff with forms, but what we do with forms is we have multiple forms. We have one form that takes us to the next form, takes us to the next form, takes us to the next form, and then, you know, the application is over. Okay, so this is really cool. We can just test this thing out. And right now it's here, and I put my username. So Tom. My password 12345 again. I click login, and it erases everything because it clears my form. And down here in the bottom, it puts my username and password inside the output window, which is what we're going to use largely for debugging. That's why I put debug.writeLine, right? all my debug, if I want to pump out my output from that I'm getting from my form, I want to use the debug window to do that primarily, not the message box. Right? Message box is for actual other things to the user, to show the user that, hey, you need to do something, or are you sure? You know, one of those kind of things. It's almost like an alert, ugly alert in JavaScript, which we never want to use, right? So you got to be careful about using that. The other thing I want to point out is this, that right now Tom and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 look different. One looks like a number and the other one looks like string. Not true. Both are strings. In fact, everything but everything you're going to get, please remember when I tell you this, when I get input from a form, they're all strings. And what we need to do if we want to make calculations, I need to convert. I cannot make strict calculations with the stuff I get from forms. So if we want to do any kind of number conversion or anything like that with the form, I've got to convert it first, and then I can pump it back out to the form itself. This is a great place to stop, but before I do that, I'm going to go into my Team Explorer here, and I'm going to just pin this up. I'm going to go to Changes, and you can see that I've changed my login form. That's all I've changed. And I'm going to say Added Mock Login Functionality. That's what it does, to the login form. And that's all I've done. I want to commit all, and I'm going to go to Home, and I'm going to go to Sync, and I'm going to Push. And this is going to add that commit to my GitHub repo. Okay, let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll do more with forms, and I'll kind of bring you up to date with the PowerPoint and see where we're at. We've done a lot already with the first one.